First of all, I would like to welcome you on behalf of Carol, Denise, Robin, Faye, Johnny, Kathy, Lou. Ping Ferry was our friend. What meant everything to Ping was family and friends. And what brought Ping together with family and friends and correspondence and an enormous crowd of fellow rabble-rousers, thinkers, scourges, although he was the real king of scold and scourge when it came to issues that were close to his heart. I think every occasion with Ping was a lesson, a graduate seminar at dinner. He didn't have too much time for small talk. He wanted to know what you thought, and it was a way of him being able to tell you and us and the public what he thought. But he always had patience and encouragement for others, younger people, his peers, people in the public. Carol has invited 5 of Ping's friends, co-workers, mentees, to make some remarks. The first of them is Grace Boggs.
I'm one of Ping's rabble-rousing friends. I didn't know that we'd have a mic. I thought I was going to have to stand up in the midst of a whole lot of people and shout. But it's a great honor to be here with Ping's family, with Carol, with Robin and Faye and Denny, and Johnny and Kathy and Lou, and the grandchildren and the grandnieces, to celebrate a really original character, a most remarkable person who is also a sweetheart. I first met Ping in 1962 when he was with the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara. I sent him a copy of a very small newsletter that I was editing in Detroit, and he sent me back some clippings, which he was prone to do. And so being in LA that summer, I called and made a date to go up to Santa Barbara to meet him. And I brought along a manuscript which my husband, Jimmy Boggs, had written, talking about the powerlessness of the union because of the new stage of automation, and anticipating that the next upsurge would be of blacks, not only on the basis of race, but because automation was making them expendable. I didn't know at the time that Ping had just completed an article, a paper called Caught on the Horn of Plenty, in which he said that the concepts of work and of economics that had been developed for the Industrial Revolution were not good enough for the scientific revolution. And my husband Jimmy had arrived at the same conclusions on the basis of his experiences on the motor line at Chrysler. So Ping got in touch with Monthly Review Press, and shortly thereafter, Jimmy's book appeared as The American Revolution, Pages from an Eagle Worker's Notebook. Ping was always doing that sort of thing. He was always encouraging people who were putting forward what he thought were important ideas. And so all over the place, you can see in the prefaces to books, this book was suggested to us by our friend, W.H. Ferry. After that, we were never out of touch with Ping. Jimmy was part of the ad hoc committee which Ping organized to investigate the Triple Revolution in production, in weaponries, and in human rights in 1964. And we kept in touch with what was going on in Detroit and with our struggles to shift the black movement from the debate between separation and integration to a concentration of focus on revolutionary transformation of our society. Years before the Kerner report, Ping was warning us about the great divide between the black nation and the white nation. So I feel that he would have had no difficulty understanding why the same whites who took in stride the Simi Valley verdict on the Rodney King beatings felt so threatened by the O.J. Simpson verdict. Because as Ping wrote, the white attitude toward blacks is benign until black claims infringe on the privileges or the peace of mind of whites. By 1968, Ping had given up on integration. Not, he said, because he had given up on blacks, but because he had given up on whites. Because he said the white attitude to the white majority said, blacks are a different order of humanity. So I feel that Ping this week would have rejoiced along with the overwhelming majority of blacks at the Million Men March in Washington. He said he was impressed with Malcolm and his successors. And I think he would have seen it as a moment pregnant with possibility. The possibilities not only for blacks, but for all of us. So this weekend, in his honor, I was in Binghamton, New York, talking to predominantly white congregations, and I asked them to rejoice along with black congregations at the Million Men March. And I was very warmly received, and I was very happy, therefore. You know, Ping didn't choose the causes he was going to support on the basis of whether or not they would be successful. At a time when most intellectuals were willing to accept the dictatorship of technology, Ping proposed that the US Constitution be amended to control technology. He said, to strive, it is not necessary to succeed. And Ping could not be intimidated by the FBI. When they would visit him to inquire about his friends and associates, he would call the person in question on the phone so they could listen in on the conversation. What my husband used to do when they came to our house was chide them and scold them for allowing J. Edgar Hoover to push them around. And he would invite them to his next meeting so they could advance their political education. You know, even though Ping and Carol and we lived quite different lives, I always have felt, Jimmy and I always thought of both of them as our comrades in struggle. And over the last few years, as we've been struggling to rebuild and redefine and re-spirit Detroit, which I might say I think that you folks on the East Coast neglect. As we've been striving to do that, as we use the phrase to re-civilize Detroit, a word which really resonated with Ping. I've always felt that Ping was by our side, because even though he spent years on the East Coast and on the West Coast, I think his heart always was in Detroit, where he was born and raised. So I want to say I miss Ping. It's not only a question of I will miss Ping. I miss Ping already. I've missed him for the last few months. But I feel very blessed that I can be counted among Ping's old friends. Thank you.
The next comments will be from Bob Van Leeuwen.
Good evening. I'm one of those who proudly admits to being one of Ping Ferry's mentees. And I was very, very pleased this evening to see the godfather of Ping's marriage to Carol, Bob Brown, walk in wearing a bow tie. If I had had the courage, I would have worn a little hat with the brim turned up, as Ping always wore, and my own bow tie. But I must admit that I was a little bit nervous this morning, all day, still am, trying to think of fitting words on an occasion like this. And I suppose I recall what words are when I try to think of words to leave all of us with in terms of a very strong and lasting impression of Ping Ferry. Words are great instruments of communication. They can communicate love, they can communicate hatred, they can communicate pleasure, they can communicate pain. They can paint vivid pictures that bring back fond memories. They can also conjure up images of horrible memories for us. Ping Ferry was a master at the use of words to bring people together. Others often use words to drive people apart and create divisions and schisms. Ping was always working on bringing people together, even those who may not have had the intelligence to agree with Ping's point of view on the world as we all know it. But Ping was a very, very tolerant person, and I will always remember Ping's willingness to share his knowledge, share his time, and always, as Grace said, always trying to find out what you and I were thinking, and then after that, tell us what he was thinking. Doris Lubell this evening said something to me that I thought was very, very relevant. She and Dave lived next door to Ping and Carol for many years, and Doris was talking about how much she misses just the thought of Ping's presence. And I know all of us always took comfort from the thought of Ping's presence. I can remember also a time a few years ago when I was visiting Ping and Carol, and Ping very quietly took me out to the garage and started giving me papers and articles and posters. And I was accustomed to this because Ping, of course, being Ping, was always giving people articles and clippings and everything. But this particular day, he seemed particularly somber. And I don't know why, but I was very worried because it seemed like he was really giving me everything, some very nice old things that I thought that he would want. And I became very concerned, and I excused myself and went in and spoke to Carol. I said, "Carol, what's wrong with Ping?" And she said, "Nothing." And I said, "Well, why is he, very quietly giving me all of these things? Are you sure he's okay and he's not sort of preparing himself for something? And Carol laughed and said, oh no, don't be silly. That's, these are just some things that Ping just wants to get rid of, and you're here, and he thought that you would be a good person to carry them off. And Carol was absolutely correct, because Ping lived a good many years after that. I wish that I could find fitting words to describe how much Ping meant to all of us. Perhaps it's ironic that today, as we gather to share memories of Ping, today is also the 50th anniversary of the ratification of the Charter of the United Nations. I think that's very symbolic, because if any one of us symbolizes the very best that the United Nations has to offer, and the very best that it will have to offer over the next 50 years, that person was and is Ping Ferry. And I hope that those who lead this world of ours, and those who wish to lead this world of ours, will pause themselves to read some of the writings of Ping, and to talk to those of us who knew Ping, and learn what a human being is really, really all about. And perhaps, rather than search for words to remember Ping, we should instead dedicate ourselves to, when we leave here, going out and committing a totally unprovoked and random act of kindness and decency to another human being. I think that's the legacy that Ping left for all of us, and that he would want us to act on rather than to speak on. Thank you, Ping, and thank you, Carol, for honoring me, really, to share a few observations about the man that all of us will continue to love, your husband, Ping Ferry. Thank you.
Richard Grossman.
Around the year 1960, Ping wrote, "The urgent need for action appears to be on display every day. The sense of unease is pervasive because there seems to be only trifling choices to be made about central issues. We are permitting the industrial and financial community to exercise functions we should ourselves be exercising through political and legal procedures. The people are being controlled instead of controlling. We have turned over treaty-making powers to private companies, as in Latin America and the Middle East. The panic signs going up in the big urban centers are appearing because we have left our political problems and common questions to be dealt with by private interests. We are at the beginning of a thoroughgoing debate on principles of political economy. I am advancing the notion that we ought to stop our hypocrisy about what in fact is going on. We ought to acknowledge and extend the rule of law over the economic machine and try to make some sense out of it. Government, as the institution organized by the people from their town councils to the national capital, needs to be rescued from their desuetude and made not only a respectable mechanism, but the purposeful means of securing the general welfare. Democracy is not senescent, but in an early stage. The United States is at the beginning of the democratic constitutional experiment, not at its high point or end. The central question, now as always, will be the role and responsibility of government. As my colleague Ward Morehouse and I began grappling with this central question in the context of today's giant corporation, it was exciting and it was vital to correspond with and talk with Ping. He held off sending the papers that he had done back in the 1960s when he was at the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions including the transcripts of discussions held there. Instead, he often wrote short notes saying things like, "You must try to illuminate the obvious with respect to the gigantic corporation. Stress the vulnerability of corporations. You're focusing on the right subject, that is, a frontal attack upon the corporation. It's Quixote-like in its approach, and there's nothing wrong with that." Several times he quoted John Maynard Keynes, "The difficulty lies not in new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones." And then he would throw in something like, "I must worry about less cosmic matters for the coming months." And indeed, I wouldn't hear from him for a while, and we would turn back to our investigations and our thinking. Later, as Ping began digging up and sending some of his writings from the 60s, we realized that he had been through the same historical literature and had had his share of quixotic experiences at the center, as the transcripts with people like A.A. Burley and Robert Hutchins and Reinhold Niebuhr and Clark Kerr and Harry Ashworth made very clear. They gave him an extremely hard time in these discussions. Ping encouraged us, but he gave us space and time to let us find our own way, when it might have been a lot easier for him just to send us his papers and say, "Hey, I've already thought about this stuff, and I've already worked it all out." Reading his old essays, one senses the need for each generation, in connection with and in context with previous generations, to work these basic questions out ourselves. And in that way also, to do what we can to save language from ruin, which he felt was a prerequisite for any of these undertakings. As he wrote, "Overuse and mutilation are draining precious words of meaning. The emptying out of words, by which one, of course, means ideas, was of little consequence when audiences were small and the offenses seldom repeated. The issue is vastly magnified when the number of exposures increases into the millions, into the trillions if the advertising sirens have their way. I hope I do not sound like a poet growling over a rejected manuscript. Depreciating the credit of the mother tongue is no personal matter. Language is our common vehicle. If our words are to be shorn of their capabilities, robbed of their nuances, used mainly to cow or subdue or deceive, it is a matter of moment to all of us." Ping chose his words with precision, especially when it came to the institution of the large corporation. When he looked at the talk about corporate responsibility, he wrote, "By responsible is mainly meant the capability to distinguish right from wrong. Much that starts out as corporate introspection regrettably ends up as a game of mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all." He labeled the mastodonic corporation a riskless and seemingly eternal organization, functioning as a government. And yet, he wrote, "We lacked adequate theory of the corporation or comprehension of the economic order, and the intellectuals are culpable. No one understands what the corporation is all about, its place in the economic order, and the purpose of the economic order itself in a constitutional democracy." Ping served as a very human link to the people of my and every generation who took the question of self-governance seriously. We all felt this when he came to our very first Rethinking the Corporation meeting held 2 years ago. He mostly listened, but when he did speak, he egged us on to think more rigorously, to raise our aspirations both for ourselves and for the nation, to think and then to act. As he wrote, "If we will take the trouble and the time to describe the kind of society we wish to live in, then we can decide the best means of making it. The one theory that should survive the onslaughts of newness is that of constitutional democracy. Democracy means self-government. It means a deliberate focus on freedom and justice, and it means a continuous concern for personal dignity. Democracy is the measure and the model on which the economic future, and the model on which the economic order of the future should be based."
Our next speaker is Julia Swag.
Seeing all of you here reminds me that even in death, Ping challenges me to do what is probably one of the more difficult things I'll do in the short or even long term. Imagine 1989, before the wall fell, a 25-year-old woman has a conversation with a gruff-sounding 78-year-old man called W.H., who tells her to meet him at a train station in Westchester. She crams the night before, reading what seems to be thousands of pages of papers that his expro, his exploratory project, had generated, and dresses next day nervously in a silk blouse. And is delighted to find that WH is Ping meeting her at the train station in a fishing hat and a very worn sweater, who whisks her off and takes her quickly to a Chinese restaurant. I was 25, it was 1989, and Ping had entrusted, and others had entrusted me with putting together a collection of quite insightful essays, which were the product of a long search by the exploratory project on the conditions of peace, which was Ping's challenge and Ping's genius to bring people together that would attempt to imagine not only a world beyond war, but to actually construct the foundations of and beliefs and institutions and even a new culture of a peace system. And as others have said here tonight, it was really about constructing a new language, cutting straight through the garble of small wars on the margins, and really attempting to imagine how the world could be based on what institutions beyond a war system. That inquiry clearly continues, and our friendship did too, far beyond the project of Expro. We quickly discovered that we had a Detroit family connection. Actually, my grandfather, who is Ping's peer, until recently ran a used machine tool business. Now, most of you probably know, or maybe you don't know, that Ping's father was an executive at Packard Motor Company. And in the early 1950s, after Packard had folded, my grandfather's machine tool business got the job of liquidating the machinery out of the huge factory that was Packard. My mother and father drove off to their honeymoon from their wedding in the last Packard that rolled off of the machine shop floor. And it was the first convertible that had an electric top that went up and down. I spoke with my grandfather today, and he asked me please to mention that. So our ties as his students started with Expro, continued through the auto industry, and continued for over the last 6 years. When Carol called and asked that I speak here, I went to my bookshelves and I looked at the range of books there that Ping had sent me, books and articles, of course. Now, there was historiography, politics, literature, philosophy, religion, history. When I decided to do my doctorate, Ping, I don't know where he got this article from the American Journal of Higher Education, which dissected the higher education industry and was a very convincing argument not to do a doctorate. I didn't pay heed, though. He sent me history. When my husband and I moved to Italy, he sent us the literature of Italy and introduced us to expatriate friends there. When we got married, he sent us material on love and on religion, and wedding vows also that he had written for another younger friend. And when I got pregnant, he sent me literature on women's body images. I think that was the most stunning and touching material that Ping sent me. And I said to him, Ping, how did this even come across your desk? And he said, I don't really know, but I thought of you instantly as I got more and more pregnant. Now, I can't say that I read absolutely everything that Ping sent me. I think by the end of his life, I had relaxed a little bit and stopped cramming for each conversation and each meeting with him. But I did read, and I want to read it to you. I'll read you a portion of it. An essay by Cicero written in 46 BC on friendship. Laelius the Wise speaks to two male visitors, and I want to say that this is about friendship between men, but for Ping, Carol told me that Ping felt proud of his friendship with me as I was a young woman that he had taken in and as a student. And I realized today coming up in the train that I took that entirely for granted. And that's a wonderful sign of the span of generations. It never occurred to me that I shouldn't have a friendship with an 84-year-old man like Ping. Now, let me close with this. Friendship, then, both adds a brighter glow to prosperity and relieves adversity by dividing and sharing the burden. And another of its very many and remarkable advantages is this. It is unique because of the bright rays of hope it projects into the future. It never allows the spirit to falter or fall. When a man thinks of a true friend, he is looking at himself in the mirror. Even when a friend is absent, he is present all the same. However poor he is rich. However weak, he is strong. And may I attempt to convey an even more difficult concept. And when he is dead, he is still alive. He is alive because his friends still cherish him and remember him and long for him. This means that there is happiness even in his death. He ennobles the existences of those who are left behind.
Bob Borisage.
As you've been standing there, I've been slashing paragraphs. Now we gather to celebrate the life of Ping Ferry, and that certainly should be easy enough. He lived very hard and very well, across almost a century that began with machine guns and ended with Windows 95, went from Wharton to Wolf, went from Sarajevo to Sarajevo, and he departed well, which I think is important. No long nursing homes for him, no long stays in the hospital. It's as if he took a couple looks at the inside of a hospital, came home and checked out. He did that well. So celebration is in order here, not grieving. Yet I found composing these thoughts very difficult, a struggle. I love this man. He was my friend, he was my mentor, a scourge, a guide in a troubled time. It has been important, essential even, that he was there in the house on Fort Hill, sitting in the fireplace across from Carol, reading, thinking, engaging the world, dispatching clips and checks, dashing off letters to editors, exposing folly, puncturing the pompous. A lot of us have depended on that. And I realized as I tried to think about what I would say and wrestled with these comments that I was most disturbed by the past tense. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous and odd, but the past tense is too definitive when it comes to Ping. It doesn't quite work. I understand what Edna Vincent Millay meant when she wrote, "I'm not resigned to shutting away of loving hearts in the hard ground. So it is, and so it will be, for so it has been, time out of mind. I know, but I do not approve, and I am not resigned." And I know about Ping, but for many of us, I think, we don't quite approve. He's too much a part of our lives and our memories to be treated in the past tense. I shall miss him. We shall miss him. It will be harder to fix a course without him there. But he did have an extraordinary run. I only know snippets of salacious tales from the early roustabout days. Dartmouth football, Choate school teacher with Joseph and John Kennedy under his wing. Don't blame him for them. Hard-drinking crime reporter at the Detroit Free Press, stern wartime price enforcer at the OPA, pamphleteer and PR director at the CIO Political Action Committee, grand corporate success dusting up the reputation of Henry Ford II. I know from history books and from fireplace memories the tumultuous days at the Fund for the Republic, the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. And it's Ping's words, I think, from that time, or recapturing that time in a progress report that he wrote at the age 75, that captures him in the way I knew him much later. He wrote, "A case for unilateral disarmament." He writes about a pamphlet that he published at the Center for the Study. Quote, "brings out the John Birch Society almost unknown. 16 tires slashed, window shot out. Kelly apologizes for center. Suggests J. Edgar Hoover is a phony and a demagogue, bringing tirades from all sides. Admiral Rickover recommends I tell Hoover I did not mean it. Kelly apologizes for center. The Triple Revolution proposes a constitutionally guaranteed annual income. Result, hundreds of fervent editorials and other scoldings. Kelly apologizes for center. I met Ping only in his, what he called in this progress report, his sixth, over 20 years ago at the launching of the Center for National Security Studies, when Leslie Dunbar, who launched that venture, introduced me to this odd character in his flat hat and tweedy coat, baggy pants, and full mutton chops. Carol and he had already set the DJB Foundation on its path-breaking course, and I had been briefed very well. Don't phone, write. Answer inquiries promptly. Doesn't like tardiness. Make arrangements clear. Be on time to dinner. We were not a likely pair, Ping and I. But I was blessed and we became friends and even mustered Carol's approval. And then a new world opened up. First thing I learned, of course, was that he was in love. No secret there. He and Carol made a home filled with warmth and love, with books and magazines, with good scotch and good people, with news from skirmishes around the globe. He opened worlds and ideas, philosophers, priests, poets, Mumford, Core, Merton, Thompson, Needham, Laughlin, and many, many more. He was crusty and opinionated and argumentative and blustery with a soft, warm heart that he tried best to cover up. For all of his occupations, I always thought of him as the quintessential public scholar, although Ping despaired of his own intellectual contributions, ironically. But he was a man engaged in the world of ideas and bringing those ideas into the public realm, and he was willing, in the Quaker formulation, to speak truth to power. He had both a bold mind and a great heart, and he was willing to mix it up. I was going to tell some anecdotes here, but let me pass and go on to just think about the decades and what he did over that time when he was so unerringly, and of course unacceptably by conventional standards, on target. In the 1950s, he confronted McCarthy and the Red Scare as a threat to the Republic, even as politicians quavered and temporized. In the 60s, he took on Hoover and the FBI, the flatulent in need of deflating, even as presidents catered to them. He put the case, as Richard said, for reconstituting the corporation He put it out and published it in the midst of the post-war prosperity. The Case for Unilateral Disarmament in the Throes of the Cold War. The Triple Revolution, a work that grows with force each day in the middle of a society worshiping technology. And he set up the exploratory project on the condition of peace and demanded that we actually think about peace, which was hard to do, in the height of the Reagan buildup and the Cold War. He was so often right, thinking over the horizon. He was a great friend and a great teacher without a classroom, with students and acolytes scattered across generations and continents, many of us here proud to number ourselves among them. So, well done, Ping. I don't think of you in the past tense. It is too definite. For you, the trite is true. You will continue to grace our thoughts and goad our consciences, and you will be greatly missed. And as the rest of us soldier on, we would do well to follow the injunction you gave yourself in your progress report written at age 75. You wrote, "The planet in growing desperation and disarray, no interest in peace except among 95% of the world's people, nonetheless, and despite the odds, must keep on a pointed course under lifelong banner, don't let the bastards get away with it."
Well, Carol chose very wisely. For a final comment, may I quote the marvelous obit in the New York Times that Peter and Cora Weiss arranged. Ferry, Ping, muckraker, peacemaker, curmudgeon, champion of justice, kind heart, splendid friend. To the very end, he kept doing the impossible, the right thing. Let's continue.
should have. We should have.